Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the SOM TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. Very honored to have you here. I am sitting at the very top of the Mayacamas mountain range at Long Meadow Ranch, overlooking the entire valley here in Napa, with my good friend, Keith Baker, who has been on the podcast before. Keith and I are going to talk about our new upcoming film, Ghosts of Napa Valley. But more importantly, we're going to talk about how the history of Napa is slowly becoming lost, and why that's going to affect the wine you drink and the perception of this region.
And your experience.
And your experience, yeah. Before I do that, I just want to say, if you're not a member of SOM TV, please go to somtv.com, subscribe. Obviously, this new film is coming there, but we just released a brand new episode on Spring Mountain AVA with the Smith-Madrone brothers, and we have a lot of great new content there, not to mention 500 hours of award-winning content that you can watch right now. Without further ado, Keith,
yes.
great to have you back on the podcast. It's an honor. I mean, last time we talked about the concept of ghost wineries, ghost stories, all of that stuff. Over the last, 4 years, you and I've been bugging you to film in abandoned wineries and such, and this film is done finally.
It is done. I'm anxious for it. Yeah, was it 20? Yeah, it was 2020, man. Mm-hmm. That's when we started, and we did that podcast at the Ghost Winery.
That's right.
At night.
And it was, for me, I am always looking for new ways to tell stories about wine, to tell stories about history, and also not make them suck. I've said over and over and over again. I mean, people might watch our films and go, yeah, it's pretty good, but you don't understand. Most wine movies are not particularly exciting. And so with this one, we had an opportunity to bring, we haven't talked a ton about it. Those of you who've seen the trailer know that these are structures that some were abandoned after Prohibition, others a little later, then they were trying to revive them. We brought a period Ouija board into these places from the turn of the century, and some shit goes down. And so, Keith, you were kind enough when you were working at Spring Mountain Vineyards to help facilitate us getting in there. But then, during the process of finishing filming and post-production, Spring Mountain Vineyards was purchased by, is it right to say, a venture capitalist group?
Yeah, close. Yep. Yeah.
And it threw things awry. Everyone's asked me, why hasn't the movie come out? Well, that's the answer. It's also the answer of why you don't work there anymore.
Yeah, that's why most people don't work there anymore. It was a firm out of New York that took over.
Yeah, which happens.
It happens.
But in the process of this, and what we're going to talk about today is kind of, it's an odd thing when an outside group comes and buys something so historical. Mm-hmm. And not because of what they do or what they can do, it's just the uncertainty. And for me, and I'm going to be able to speak maybe a little more open than you can or want to, for me, watching Napa Valley turn since the first SOM movie, which was 12, 13 years ago, we started filming, 14 years ago maybe, it was a very much simpler place than it is now. Now I feel like it's a ton more money sits on the valley floor and in the mountains than ever existed. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, the first time I was here was, God, I sound old, 1980s. Mm-hmm. And I can remember just walking in. There was, you just walked into a winery. You didn't have to worry about reservations. And now a lot of that's fine. Laws change and everything like that. But to answer your question, I think it's not just one winery that it happened to. Mm-hmm. There's these huge historic wineries that everyone has heard about or everyone knows about wherever you might live. And so people come in, purchase those wineries, and make changes because they think they know what Napa is, or they think they know how we are, or that we're all, as I've mentioned to you before, we're all in Ferraris and sundresses.
Yeah, no, but there is an element if you're in certain parts of Napa, and forgive me, I'm not trying to, throw stones here, but, it could be like downtown Aspen, it kind of, women are in hats and it's very expensive. And
it's very bougie, as they say.
You said it, and it can be, but it's funny to think like Napa was a place of the Wild West.
It's the farmers
and
Wild West.
I think that's why making this film, it's so important to, yes, it's a ghost story. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a great, really entertaining arc with that end. But then there's also this element of this history and kind of telling these stories, keeping them alive.
Yeah, because a lot of them are fading.
Yes.
And disappearing away. Napa goes back, the valley goes back to a time when, people took their law into their own hand. And I've told you so many stories, and one of my favorite is that rich versus poor St. Helena and the last hanging that ever occurred in Napa. That's right out of the Wild West.
When was that? The last
Last hanging was
hanging in
early
Napa.
early 1900s. I don't remember the exact date now because I haven't read about it in a while. But I mean, it happened right on Main Street, and the kid was 19 years old. And they even know the families who did it, and some of those wineries still exist. Again, I'm not going to mention names, but I mean, these are the wild stories, and the fact how they dragged this kid out, how it started at a brothel behind the fire department now in St. Helena, which is actually also another winery's room. So I don't know if they know the history of what happened there, but it was a brothel. And there's just so many of these amazing stories of Napa Valley and the people who came here. And as we mentioned, now I haven't seen the movie, but as we've mentioned in the movie or I talked about, all of these nationality groups came here at a time where they had to learn to get along.
So, Keith, what's an example of a winery where the history has sort of slipped away, and if people knew that history, the wine would be elevated by it?
One of my favorites is probably Marciano Vineyards, probably because...
Which is where? Where's Marciano?
It's down by Sulphur, down the road here, and Sulphur Springs. And a friend of mine, Lindsay, works there, and they knew a little bit about their history, but I was working with her to do a deep dive, and there's this story at Marciano where the woman who founded that winery, and it was a woman when women weren't supposed to, they were already very successful in Sacramento, and what had happened was her husband committed suicide in the bathtub. He sent his family here to Napa. They were just going to build a winery, and for some reason he had some mental health issues. He thought they were failing. They weren't, so he shoots himself in the bathtub. Now, they had to change that, or the family would be ruined. So this woman, trying to raise her two kids, sort of hides behind her son, in a sense, and, because he has to be the face. A woman can't be the face, and they changed the narrative.
What's the time period here?
Late 1800s.
Okay.
They had to change that narrative. The gun accidentally went off. Very similar to what we talked about.
Story in Ghost in Napa Valley. Yeah, everyone's going to get to see that story.
Yeah. But, if anyone knows, well, one, he was naked. So, he's in this bathtub, and a gun doesn't fall apart and then discharge. But that's what the papers, they changed the story. I don't know how she did it. But this woman goes on to build these huge estates, incredibly successful winery, and one of the most beautiful homes in the Bay Area, which is Filoli, where they hosted the Premier of China. She's involved in all of this stuff, and her story, people should know about this story. Now, Marciano Vineyards does talk about that story, but this should be a story. With Lindsay, when we were working together on this, I was pulling the articles with her, and we were talking about that story. There's another amazing story, too. Now, see, you got to sort of slap me when you get me going. There's a B&B down the road here. It's stunningly beautiful. Italianite home, Francis House. The second owner of that is a Civil War veteran who escorted President Lincoln into Richmond.
And then ended up in Napa.
A lot of Civil War veterans came this way because they didn't want to be over there. So you've heard me talk about a couple of them already. Sure. They come down here to start a life in a different part of the country because they just experienced something horrific. So they come down here. They were instrumental, some of them, in founding St. Helena. Two of them that you've heard me talk about, not just the one here, but also the one down at St. Helena, who built Oak Street, the Logan House by Farmstead and everything. He built all those homes. These are all Civil War veterans, who came out here and created what Napa is. I can walk down that street now, and people should know, that was Chinatown. That street was built as mini farms over here, where Farmstead is.
The Gott's Market.
That was
the Gott's like a burger stand.
Yeah, it's good. By the way, good burgers.
What's Chinatown? Okay,
Chinatown was right there, and so Logan would hire them and built what they call mini farms. So farms big enough for gardens, but not big enough for cattle. So all of these people come out here, and you're walking right through this history here in Napa. And I got a little off center with Marciano Vineyards, but there's so many of these stories like Marciano Vineyards, which I also, we've talked about before as well, where people just don't know. They don't know they're standing in something really, truly incredible happened right here.
Yeah.
Or not so incredible as far as the hanging from the lamppost, but, that happened right here. And that's what's so vibrant and exciting about Napa that I don't want to see continue to fade away.
I mean, the whole story in Ghost in Napa Valley is about, the foundation of these immigrants coming here. A lot of trauma. This is a place where a lot of bad things happen to people in the early part of that time. But now, I mean, if we're talking about now, so what I've seen in Napa is the first thing. I'm going to pigeonhole money here. It's not fair. It's not fair.
That's okay. Go ahead.
But the first thing a great deal of money does is they want to change things for the sake of change.
Yes.
And not just that, They want to change things. They want to make it flashier, and they want to go, look at how modern we are.
Right. And look at how expensive and how amazing, here's going to be your experience. And it's very sad to me that a lot of them, have sort of let that history fade a little bit, in the perception being that, everyone wants to come here and spend hundreds of dollars on tasting fees and be greeted with caviar and champagne. People do want an experience, but they want to come here and they want to make a connection to who we really are.
I don't know where that comes from, though, because, maybe Bordeaux, but if you go to Champagne, they don't do that.
No.
You can't even get into a tasting room in Champagne, and if you do, it's often not meant for you. The rooms are elegant and beautiful, but you go down the cellar, they're full of cobwebs, and they for real.
Yeah.
And I think the thing with Napa, this cleanliness and sterilization is a real bummer for me as a photographer, but it's also a bummer because who the hell wants to hear about your brand new fermenter? Seriously. I'm not kidding you. When we go to make a movie, I want to see spiders. I want to see cobwebs. I want to see cellar mold. I want to see stuff that shows you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And for me, in wine, I think age is the only thing that brings wisdom and quality. New stuff is not interesting. And this is not a knock on new wineries. It just means that, okay, you had the money to pull it off. Now prove that you could hang in there. And the great wines of the world are ones that have hung in through, wars or fire or changes of ownership and all this stuff. And now I see there's it went from thousands and thousands of owners in the valley to there's 25 owners that own everything. It's
there's some big players here, and
am I being negative? I'm not trying to be jaded here or negative.
Just take a look at where, a good example is the street I live on. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's 8 homes, still a private road. I think only 3 of those homes have full-time residents. Weekend homes now, where people are dropping 1 point some million on a weekend home that they come and visit occasionally. And so you have a ton of money that has moved into this valley in the last 10 to 15 years. And you have people chasing that money, as you mentioned, where you and I agree on that. You give me an old stone building or a cave, that's got that mold on it and everything else. It's that, not mold, but
black cellar mold. I think is gorgeous.
It's just amazing. And I love the smell. I love the feel. I love the history. And then you tell these stories and you're standing where these things occurred. These amazing, amazing stories. I agree. That's what you want to hear. I don't want to go to a tasting, and I've been on a ton of them, where I'm sitting there trying to prop my eyes open because I'm hearing stories about mid-palate notes of dark cherry followed by our regimen of 70-30% of new versus used French oak. I don't care. I want to make a connection to this winery. I want to know about them and their history and their story.
Well, I think knowing what's in the glass is one thing, but then also knowing what's really in the glass, meaning
yeah,
maybe I'm just in the minority. Maybe I've fully entered dad mode where I just like history. But it is one of these things where I'm telling you, if you go to Napa and you go to a place that has real history and you drink the wines, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be better. Yeah. They're just going to be better.
And you're going to remember that, and you're going to have that connection because, this is a newer wine, let's say, or whatever it is you're drinking, but these people have been making this wine and struggling and creating this thing for over 100 years, and their stories should be told.
Right.
We just didn't appear after the Judgment of Paris. People have been here for over 100 years struggling to make this place successful, and that's what I want to hear people talk about. And that's what I want to go to a tasting at some of these other wineries and say, oh my God, I didn't know that. Or whether it's up here when here at Long Meadow, when I talk to people about our history in those olive orchards we were talking about earlier. I want to know that. I want to know the uniqueness of how this happened. How did this occur? And what did these people struggle? And that's going to connect me to that winery.
It is the truth, though, whether you're a sommelier or you run a tasting room or hospitality program like yourself, you have to make it accessible, though. I mean, history for most people, when I was growing up, people were so oh God, history class, this sounds boring. And honestly, I'll tell you, that was the opposite effect. I had a great teacher, turned me into this stuff, and I love it. But for me, this ghost story is a great wrapper around history because, in my personal opinion, tales are the reason things continue to keep going. I want to ask you, do you think we are going to regret in the future the modernization of Napa? Are we going to regret this in 5-10 years? Are we going to say, oh shit, we made a big mistake?
I don't think it's sustainable, the change that you're talking about. So do I think some people are going to regret it? I think some people already are regretting it. and the things
I
that
wish you'd name names in here.
I know
really
you do.
Careful. Being very careful. I'll give you a hint. He's talking about people who own more than 5 wineries each. You can tell you. I don't even have to say if you're here. Inside baseball, you know who he's talking about. Keep going.
Well, now I lost my train of thought, and quite frankly, it was brilliant.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. No, you're saying so they you don't think it's necessarily they're going to regret it. It's unsustainable.
You know, when I talk to people, when I do tastings, I'm 95% of the time, no one's asking me the technical questions. I mean, I can answer them, but no one's asking me. Almost always, people are overwhelmed with the story I'm telling them, whether it's Spring Mountain District or whether it's Howell Mountain or whether it's here at my Camas. People are overwhelmed to hear these stories and make these connections, and that's what they want. They don't want me to greet them at the door with champagne and caviar that I don't even make on premise, and create this experience that you could think you were in, like you said, Beverly Hills or something. No, they want that connection to this land. They want that connection to these wines. So can they sustain this stuff? No, they're not, because some of these people who will not be named, they're hemorrhaging money right now. It's not a secret in the Valley that some of these people who've come in are in trouble.
Well, it's also this sick, it's a cycle where you spend a ton of money.
Yeah.
Things get overvalued, which, value is a difficult thing to discuss, because the value to something that has an ROI, return on investment, is different than the value to somebody who wants it.
100%.
So those are two different things. And in a lot of cases, it's, I must have this thing, and then they get it, and then they go, oh shit, it has to make money.
Yeah.
And so then, look, I have a real hot take. I don't think, God, I can't wait for the response on social media here. I don't think there is a bottle of wine in the entire world, and I'm serious, you heard me right, that is worth over $175 on release. I would argue that I'm probably overshooting that by $25. Now, we're not actually getting to what it's. I know you're smiling. I'm sure you have to sell wine. I'm not. But
no, I'm not even.
I don't have to sell wine, and I'm talking about the greatest French wines. They are not worth over that dollar amount. The only reason they are is because they're not wine any longer. There's something else.
There's something else.
But Napa had a rip cord where they pulled the lawnmower cord, and they got to jack the price up way quicker than these other regions were able to. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the fact that it got more expensive. I mean, a lot of wines in France 20 years ago were really affordable, and now they're expensive. The difference is their value and their perception built up over centuries, let alone. Mm-hmm. So I have a problem with, now you've got to charge $50 to $100 for a tasting in Napa, and then you have to charge $400 for your reserve cab or whatever it is just to have an ROI, to then continue to lose money on a property you overpaid for.
Right. I completely agree with you.
I mean, that's a weird soapbox to be on.
It is. It's lovely. I still need to sell wine, man. But, I think you've heard me preach this before, too, because one of the things that's important to me is, which I know I'm probably going to hear about this, too, but, the thing about wine, to me, is it's no more important than art, food, music, or you and I sitting here. It's supposed to make life a little better. It's not supposed to be put on an altar under a spotlight and people think, oh my God, this is Jefferson's and it's going to be worth, $1,000, $5,000. No, it's something that we should be able to all enjoy to make our lives better. That's really what it should be. And I agree. And kudos, we're a country that loves marketing. But that's what it is. It's marketing. It's the feeling that this is exclusive or this is rare, this is hard to find. I'm going to charge you a lot because, yes, I have to cover my costs of overpaying for this winery, closing it for 2 years to remodel it, and then changing it into something it was never meant to be.
The build out on a winery and changing things is one thing. I mean, it's a different thing if you buy a structure and you have to make it safe. It's a different thing if you buy a structure and you say, I would like it to be so that people can actually visit it, because the road's not conducive to that. But it's another thing to go, well, I would like there to be rhinestones all over the front of it now, or I'd like to change it. That sounds like a joke, but it's not a joke.
No, I'm laughing because you know what I'm thinking of.
I don't deserve to judge people who have a different view of what wine is and what it's supposed to be. But I'm telling you right now, like you said, it is supposed to be. It's not communism here. You're not supposed to get wine for free, but it is supposed to be like food.
Yeah.
It's like bread and food, and outside of like religious context, it is supposed to be for everyone. I truly believe this.
Yeah.
Unless you're Mormon or something, then you don't get it.
Well, I got some stories for you about that too.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you
Good
do.
one.
But that's a sad thing about Napa, because you say the word Napa,
Yeah.
and I think it does conjure this opinion of, I'll use Aspen as a comp, a place that's expensive, a place that's like, whoa, you're going to Napa.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like that when I first started working in this business. Napa was a place that you could, just flick on over to and have a weekend or whatever, or be welcomed by, like you said, farmers. So now it is this very different thing. And if you were tasting wine in Napa 15 years ago, you had a 75% chance of running into the winemaker.
Yeah.
Now, that winemaker is in Atlanta at a tasting when you're here. They don't even spend much time, in the vines often. So it's just such a different mentality of kind of how it, and it happened quickly.
There are still some of those family wineries.
I would be much more willing to spend $175, which, by the way, is my cap for any bottle of wine in the
Keep
world.
that in mind.
If I knew that this wine was a product of struggle
Yeah.
and time
Yep.
and the things that truly make wine good. Now,
I agree.
Now, if there's something scary involved, I'm even more.
better.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of campfire type stories.
Oh, I am too.
I'm a big fan of, your dad or your aunt who just knows how to tell stories. And every time they're told a little different, it's kind of game of telephone that goes 100 years. And by the time it gets to you as a kid, it sort of forms who you are.
Yeah.
And I think those stories, whether you know them or not, they're sitting here in the bricks and they're important for people to understand. And I'll tell you, hopefully Napa can get itself in the place where it's less about profit, because it's become like the tech industry. How fast can you turn and burn something and make a profit and sell it for a lot of money? But this is not the right business for that.
There's always that joke I know we've all heard. How do you lose a fortune?
Yeah, no, it's how do you make how do you make a fortune in the wine business? You start with an even bigger fortune. Or, how do you make $3 million? You start with $9 million.
Yeah.
Because you're going to lose money. And that's any product where there are no clear solutions to your problems. Filmmaking is a lot like this, but not on a scale like winemaking, where you can throw money at it and you can keep doing that. But eventually, money does not solve the problem. You're just burning it. It takes intelligence and it takes patience.
And understanding of what really works. It's what you said. You are willing to pay for that connection. It's not just a experience. And so a lot of times when I've gone into wineries to talk to them about sales, that's what you need to do for sales, what you just talked about. We want a connection to Napa Valley. We want to know the struggles behind, this bottle of wine that we're sitting here looking at, because that's something I'm going to take back to, Minneapolis, and I'm going to be sitting at a table with my friends and talking about it. And one of the best texts I ever got was from someone I'd hosted years ago. They were actually up in Canada, and they sent me a message, and they sent me a picture because they were opening up a bottle of wine, and I had told them when they were here in Napa the whole history of that vineyard and the struggles, and I'm not going to go into it because it's in your movie. And they were drinking it in Canada, and they were raising a toast, and they said, Keith, here's to your stories.
That's great.
Because that's what they remembered a year later, opening that bottle of wine up in Canada. That's what sells wine. And do I think Napa's going to lose it? I don't think the people who live here are. I think what's happening is people who don't live here who are buying those wineries and assuming we're something we're not. So I'm not as doom and gloom. I don't think it's going to completely disappear. I think we're seeing a time right now where a lot of families are struggling in Napa. We've had fires, we've had COVID, and people are selling to these large organizations, and the stories get lost in that. There was a book called The Rise of Napa Valley Wineries that a friend of mine wrote, and in the very end, he made, which I can't quote right now, but he made a comment about a very historic winery, and he had talked to one of their kids, and they said to him, we thought we were selling to other farmers. And they weren't. They were selling to someone who completely changed everything and made it into an experience that is unapproachable now by most people. No, I'm not going to mention the name. Look at your face.
I'm afraid I might know who you're talking about. But, well, this is another reason, come September, I'm very excited for everybody listening, and especially you, Keith, who I will send the film to probably in a day or two. I wanted to talk to you before you saw it, just in case you have any complaints. Then I don't want to hear them now. So, no, but I'm very excited for people in September. Release date is going to be announced shortly, but it's mid-September.
Yeah, I'm excited.
When we do these screenings, the Napas, the Chicago, the New York Cities, they are hard as hell to put together. So please, when we announce them, get your tickets and get them fast. And come drink with us. Keith, it's an honor and a pleasure. Yes. And do a little toast to Napa Valley.
Toast Napa Valley, my friend.
Okay,
Thank you.
cheers.
Cheers.